Well, just to remind everybody about access management, here's a definition. And certainly for the local governments, it goes beyond driveways, medians, and signals or interchanges and gets into the full network and as well as land use and land developments, which is what we're going to be talking about today. It's also conflict management, and as we're increasingly understanding the need for a multimodal system, we're also beginning to understand better how to manage conflicts across the different modes of transportation. And certainly as we started access management and back in the early 90s when I did the first edition, it was very vehicular focused. We did address pedestrian issues and transit issues to a certain degree, but as the department is shifting towards complete streets implementation, and there's a overall understanding in the planning field about the need to be more multimodal focused. It's also getting into the goals of access management, where we're looking at conflicts and safety across the various modes and that need for a good network and good mobility. I want to point you to two major new national resources, if you're not already aware, that in 2014, TRB published the second edition of the TRB Access Management Manual, and that edition includes a lot of information on the strategies that are in the model regulations. I'm going to talk about it. It includes numerous updates. And then in 2016, application guidelines were also published, and that basically provides some more rationale, some more examples of applications, and also some tools, some spreadsheet tools, right turn, decel lanes, and sight distance calculation spreadsheets that are part of that. And the two documents are linked, and so if you get the electronic version, you can click on the link within the chapter of the Access Management Manual where what we're calling the AMAG is referenced. It takes you right to that other document. So that just came out, gosh, I think it was last week. So if you have trouble finding it, it's only because TRB is still kind of putting together the publications on their website. It's out there, but we noticed that they hadn't had them all linked together on a single page. But just Google it, and if you have any trouble and you want to get it, just let me know and I'll help you find it. So kind of going back in time, and this is, I think, Gary, this is US 98?
Yes, it is. It's US 98 and area around Destin.
Okay, and up and down the corridor you can see that there were a number of lots for sale for commercial development, relatively small frontages, and Gary certainly saw the issues associated with this and the difficulty of achieving access management when the land is being divided into small lot frontages, and those lots are going to need access. So way back then he contacted Cutter, and I had just done a similar work in Michigan for the Michigan Society of Planning Officials on land division and access controls, and so we got together and developed this work, the one that he had mentioned, 1994, Model Land Development and Subdivision Regulations, to try to get at the issue. And we went up and down the US 98 corridor with a kind of a mobile training program. I think it was a half a day back then. And
we had slides, and we had real slide projectors.
We did. We used
and
slides.
Overhead projectors, yes, that's how long ago it was.
And color overheads, which we thought were really nifty. And I still had some of those materials in my office I threw out about 2 months ago. Yeah, back in the day, right?
Yeah.
But it was fun, and people really responded. We found a lot of support and interest among the local government officials that attended these workshops, and even some elected officials chose to attend. I think one of them had an elected official. And it wasn't long after that that we started to see implementation, adoption and implementation of these regs. And so one, I think the big success story up there was US 98 in Okaloosa County, and you can see the service road that was implemented with the roundabout there that runs parallel along the corridor. So let me just kind of take you back in time, and here's the initial, it's the location is in Destin, and the initial shared driveway or service road started at that location. Looks something like this. And basically, the county started implementing the service road system through their concurrency authority because the highway was congested and they were experiencing issues associated with the level of service. And so these developments were coming in around the same time, and so the county said, we need to do something about access. So over time, and this was at a TGIF Fridays and a bank, and it's
that last picture showed the TGI Fridays on the right and the bank on the left, and those are kind of the points. And the next slide shows you the end of their driveway. Yeah.
Okay, and then Gary's got this great series that he developed. So here we have this road system starting to develop out. This is in 2003, and all the landscaping's in place. The road network is starting to be implemented. Oops, doesn't want to move forward. There we go. In 2011, and so more and more is coming in as the area is starting to develop further. And then to the west, another segment. Even further to the west, and you can see the roundabouts that are going in as well. And then now east of the site, it's connected in. And I think this next slide is showing they're also now beginning to add sidewalks into the system, because in the early days, nobody thought about it.
If you go back 2 slides, Christine, you will see, let's see, go forward.
Sorry.
Yeah, that if you really look carefully, well, maybe
Where's
too,
my
not
little...
too careful. You can see, yeah, you can see sidewalks were actually added to Commons Drive, which is that parallel, I'll call it backage road. The lack of sidewalks on the original part of Commons Drive became quite apparent when people who went to the stayed at the hotel that you saw in the first picture wanted to walk to either the beach stores or the restaurants, and big ruts formed in all of those, and that's when they realized that they needed to put sidewalks. First they put them on one side, and then they realized they needed to put them on both sides. But if you look carefully, you can see that there are sidewalks, and like Christine said, now even some roundabouts there. Thank you, Christine.
Sure. Thank you. And we've all experienced that, right? You can't get from the hotel to the Cracker Barrel on foot. You have to drive. So,
right.
So then here we are in contemporary age of multimodal planning and mobility fees and all of these other things that have happened in mobility plans. And so Gary initiated an effort with us to update the model regs, and so I'm going to just touch on a few highlights, and you certainly have a copy of it or can obtain one. So the model access management regulations are really intended as an example to allow the local governments to working with their professional planners and their lawyers, adapt that model language to fit their needs. And that's what we're saying under the introduction there. And also, we're also advising communities to really do the planning that they need to do, develop that thoroughfare plan, start getting the transportation network that supports these major highways in place and that accommodates development, and provide for those corridor or access management plans, interchange area plans where they're needed. The intent and purpose statement was revised and updated to show really this is a multimodal issue, and it also is an issue of not only access control on major roadways like the CIS highways, but it's also an issue of enhancing the accessibility of developed areas, and that connectivity of the network is so important for that, and that's some of what happens in the local government side of access management and the site access and circulation and so forth. And we gave a variety of different approaches, or tried to, at least, so that local governments of different sizes and degrees of complexity could adapt one approach or another. So, for example, you could assign your standards based on functional class or based on posted speed, or you could use the access categories and assign those as well. And that's one of the big changes, I think, in the model, is that we simplified those categories, which I'll get to in a minute. And you know, that emphasis on lot splits and land division and how do we manage all these different types of lots remains. For those of you that remembered the original, that's all still in there. And that was a big part of it, because the subdivision process in Florida and other states does include a variety of exemptions for certain types of land division activity. Exempts it from the subdivision and platting process if there's not a street being created and only a few lots. And that's a good idea, so it's not too onerous for the property owner, but there has to be some review of that, or those lots can get recorded directly with the county, and the local government may never even know they've been created, and they can create a lot of issues. So we explain that, and some of those issues that we saw back then are the flag lots, and this is just a really bad example of flag lots, and this was obtained from District 2, I believe, and you can see, I don't know, I think you animated this, Gary, yeah. So if you look closely, you can see how they stack those lots with all the private easements right at the median openings. So ultimately the district went in and said, hey, you guys really need to create a private road here and talk to each other about maintenance and come up with a joint maintenance agreement. And essentially, I believe that's what happened. So these types of issues were cropping up all over Florida, and they were happening sometimes outside of any local review because of those exemptions in land division. And so one of the things we said was you need to have a minor land division or lot split ordinance in place, and those regulations are in the model that allow you to review this. And you also need flag lot regulations to prevent this from ever happening again. And here were some these long, narrow bowling alley lots lined up and down 98 U.S. Highway 1998. This was in, I think, Levy County.
Yeah, I think yeah.
Yeah,
Chiefland. So it's amazing what you'll find on these old maps.
Yeah, and these, of course, are dysfunctional. But it's hard to go back and vacate these old plats. So property owners, people that want to develop these would essentially have to, buy several of them and try to consolidate them and that sort of thing. But we did a lot of work with them related to the model regulations after a workshop up there, and they adopted a regulation and overlay along that highway and started implementing cross-access and other strategies to try to, address the situation, but also to put some preventative measures in for these types of lots ever being created in the future.
Hey, Christine,
Yeah,
we got a question from Miguel Vargas
yeah,
that I thought was very interesting. It was related to our Destin um,
service
example.
roads.
And the question was something about how far back that the backage road was and what was the spacing between accesses on US 98. And what I'm going to do, if I can find myself, is to make myself the presenter for just a moment.
Should I
So
send it
I
back
can,
to
yeah,
you?
no, I can do it. I can do it. I'm
Okay.
gonna make myself the presenter, and I'm going to show my screen one. Come on, screen one clean, and you'll see an aerial. This is just fresh off of GoTo, no, not GoTo, Google
Google.
Maps, and this is uh, this is interesting. It's no longer Fridays, but the bank is still a bank. No, wait a second. No, that looks like it could be Fridays, but it's not. Anyway, this is your control point here. So I did some measuring here, and the backage road is between 300 and 450 feet from US 98 throughout. And it has been far enough back that it doesn't interfere with the operations of the accesses on US 98. Matter of fact, I'm going to go up close here, and you'll see since the county did put this in soon enough, there are no driveways here. The driveway that they built originally is the one right here, which is not really a driveway, but it was a county road built to county standards. And wait a second, I was wrong. Yeah, there's Fridays and the bank. Okay, they've since put in the roundabout there, because there's the hotel, and they still have no sidewalks here to get to Fridays real easily. But this is about 400 feet, and let me show you that this is about that's about 700 feet there to the first from the major intersection to that access. And as you move down here, you'll see there's no driveways, and you'll see there's one here at the beach zone. And that's because the beach zone was there before the land development regulations took effect. So they were grandfathered in. But you can see that the backage road and the land development regulations along this highway had really had an impact on preventing lots of driveways. And so there you have it. And I won't, I'll give you back the presenter, Christine. All right. Thank you. I just wanted to answer that question for Miguel.
Great, thanks, Gary. So moving forward, I mentioned the Complete Streets Implementation Plan. The context classification system is a core part of that, and the importance of looking at access in the context of the context zones. And so that's where access management is now, is how are we going to relate the two topics more directly, and thinking about the strategies as well as the category systems, and just kind of how we're implementing access management. Now, the model regulations include this table, which I guess I could start with this one here, but what we've done is in a very generalized sense, relate the strategies that you see in the model regulations to the different context areas, whether it's a rural, suburban fringe, or suburban, or you're moving into a much more compact urban environment, and how those strategies might change, or they might also be carried through. So certainly, like for land division, early on in the rural and suburban areas, those lot split and dimensional controls, I didn't mention on those long bowling alley lots, but we also included some lot width to depth ratios to prevent that from happening. That flag lot issue, preventing that, and moving into shared access, and then finally, once you're into the compact urban environment, reinforcing those urban blocks, the city block system, and that good network. And then here we've got more strategies. So we just kind of walk through the different topic areas and tried to relate them generally to the context that you're in. For example, when you're in the suburban environment, you're really in many times a retrofit situation where you're trying to control those deficiencies. And let me find my little pointer. So down in here, during redevelopment, you're trying to achieve some improvements to access that had been grandfathered in, like the beach store that we just saw, and getting rid of poor offsets or multiple driveways, and then moving into your main street and trying to prevent driveways along that main street and removing ones that are there and getting that block system in place. So there's a variety of issues there, and kind of trying to relate it back to the strategies. Network and connectivity of the network is so important to access management, and so the street network standards that we provided were an effort to start to address this issue. And you see in the figure to the top there, and I'll go back with my little laser pointer, this figure that's in the model regulations and was in an earlier study that we did in Alachua County, moving from Gainesville into Newberry on the highway there, and we saw that there just was very poor connectivity even in the new development that was taking place. The county is certainly addressing that. They're trying to get connections in the road network, and this image to the right here shows really, what we're trying to accomplish. And even if you do have cul-de-sac developments, you can, if you can't do anything else, you can at least connect the pedestrian way between those two cul-de-sacs to shorten that trip. But by doing the network, you can see you can get the access off of the highway. Well, it's a no-brainer. So we've got some provisions in the model, and this one is just showing a provision modeled after one that we found, I believe it was in Maryland, at a local government ordinance. It might have been Rockville or Montgomery County. And this was in the multimodal district model that we at Qatar had developed a while back, if those of you who remember MMTDs or multimodal transportation districts. But basically saying when the development comes in that they're going to look at access and network and connecting their network for a quarter-mile radius around that development to the extent possible. And there are a number of other regulations in that section that kind of lead toward improved street network and connectivity that you can look at. And service road requirements, just like the ones that we saw in Okaloosa County, Hernando County was really an early leader in that. I mean, in the 80s, before the first edition of the model regs, they had adopted what they called a frontage road ordinance. And they recognized that over time there were some issues with frontage roads, and I think you're all aware as access management practitioners on the phone here and the internet that when you connect those roads too closely to an existing intersection, then you're going to have problems and conflicts around that intersection. So moving the roads to the rear of the property is a good idea. And over time, as development is occurring along these highways that Hernando County had designated for their service roads or frontage roads, then they're seeing opportunities to realign the network at a signal like you're seeing here. So the network is slowly getting built out and completed. So it's just, this is an image that we included as an example. And we did provide some service road regulations, by the way, that you can look at, and they're built into different parts of the model. There's a corridor access management overlay provision, a set of provisions that talks about implementation of service roads and control of lot splits and measures that immediately freeze the existing land division activity on those corridors. So this example here, the interparcel connectivity is also key. It's certainly more than controlling driveways, as the slide says, but it's getting those connections in between developments so customers can get easily from one to another should they choose to patronize more than one business in that area, and that they can also get out to a signal for a safe and managed left turn, or a roundabout, as the case may be. And so here we have an example of that, and the model regulations provides for joint and cross access, whether it can be through a planning process where an official goes out and assigns these requirements to specific corridors or specific segments as an overlay, or in general. They could be system-wide. They could be done in the case of a deviation from standards where development can't meet the access spacings, but it's assigned as a condition that they'll do this in the future. Or you could waive the standards altogether where they do agree to share a driveway and provide interparcel connectivity. So let's go to the next example, and here's another good example of that where we've got unified access and circulation among several developments, and I believe this is in Cape Coral. And again, Cape Coral was another one that looked at the model regulation. They also developed an access management plan for Pine Island Road that we'll see in a moment. And this one is a driveway that serves, several relatively high traffic uses along that highway. And this is an example again of, I believe, Pine Island Road. And so one of the things, and you can see here with this image, but also this statement, see Section 7, for corner clearance in Section 11 for out-parcel access, the first part of the model has background and information to explain the strategies, and then you can click right on those section links to take you to the regulations that will accomplish the strategy. And here you can see Section 11 to your right on out-parcels and phased development plans. And that actually is I think pretty much the same as what we had in the original document. It's a really good regulation that is similarly addressed in Rule 1497. Is it 1496 or 1497, Gary? It's in one of the rules.
1497 is the rule
category
that deals with the standards.
Okay. And so this is just saying if it's under common ownership or part of a consolidated development, it's going to be treated as a single development for the purpose of access management. And so those accesses should be considered in that respect, and a unified circulation plan provided. And this shows that in this particular site, there's an out parcel. I think this is a Walmart shopping center, and the out parcel in the future is going to obtain internal access from that unified circulation system, which also gets you some really good corner clearance and not a lot of conflicts at the intersection. Now, in an urban context, all this changes, right? And so what happens is you have the development fronting on the street. It provides great pedestrian access and access for transit users. And then that again can get you some good corner clearance by having the buildings right there at the street. It pushes the access to the sides of the property, and that access may be a driveway, it may be city blocks where you're parking and going off onto a side street for a garage or whatnot. So again, here is Pine Island Road, and you're seeing as they have beginning to develop along that route, they're requiring the implementation of that rear service road. They're trying to maintain good connectivity using those strategies, but they're also looking at land use and what they want to be in the future, whether they want to continue to be suburban or create a more urban village style environment like you see in the illustration. And so they've identified some activity center areas that are developing where they want to kind of accomplish that mixed-use village style development and connect it well both internally and to the external residential areas so that people might actually be able to walk or bike as well, or have a shorter vehicle trip and not have to get back out on the highway. So here are some changes that happened for those of you that are familiar. So in the first edition, we just mimicked the FDOT access category descriptions and standards. And in this edition, we decided to try to create some generalized categories that are similar to the types of roads you might find in your urban environment that might be able to be adapted to relate to a local thoroughfare plan if you're adopting a complete streets plan that has different types of roadways and cross sections, and some roadways are going to be more of a boulevard or a main street environment. And so we noted the context classifications of FDOT. And with category A being, of course, your high-level principal arterial type roadway where you're really trying to accomplish good through movement and progression of traffic. And so those context classifications are also going to be your rural to your suburban, but your higher level roadways. And then the second category is more of your mobility roadways within and across an urban area. So these are regionally important roadways to your city or county. But they're not at the same level as a Category A, and they should include medians, both of them. In this case, they might have some that are undivided or not, but you're still trying to get good control of those for a safe environment for everybody, including your bicyclists and pedestrians. And so you're seeing some of the classifications, context classifications there as well. And then C would be more of your dense urban context. You want lower speeds, you have more community activity, pedestrians and bicyclists are out there, and so those areas are going to be closer to your compact urban or your small town main street and your general urban areas. And they may even include a transit priority street or pedestrian priority street. So with that in mind, what they kind of relate to is shown over to your right. And you can see the FDOT access classes. Can you see my laser pointer? A little bit.
Yes, I can. I can see it very well.
Okay, good. So you can see like A would be closer to your class 2, possibly class 3, but really class 2. Your Bs are more your 3s and 4s, your Cs, 5s and 6s. And I guess, you know, what changed, and at least in the model here, is you're not seeing class 7. And the reason for that was class 7, that 125-foot spacing, was really a way to accommodate that suburban strip, which isn't a recommended practice. It's not where we want to go with access management in the contemporary state of the practice, but rather achieving some good control along those roads is very important for all users, and so that is not reflected in the example. And so we've got category A, B, C here, and these are basically the Florida DOT access spacings that you see in the category 2 through 7, or 2 through 6, I'm sorry. So those are the same, and the median opening spacing is the same. If there's a median, this is what they would be. And you see these little notes here we've added is, for example, if it's a posted speed less than or equal to 45, the quarter mile, and the half mile would be the higher speed roadways, and that's basically the Florida DOT's current standards. If there's a median. And then, there's note 1 up there. So full openings are regulated. Directional openings, we did not include regulations and said that really they can be allowed anywhere where the engineer determines that those U-turns or left turns can be safely accommodated, and that they fit in terms of the design. And sometimes greater distances may be necessary for left turn or turn lane storage. So there you have that. And then 3 is kind of interesting that we added in that says, well, these are the spacings, but they're also per existing block spacing or block spacing identified in the plan of the local government or an approved development plan. So that might set the spacing in that example. And talking about the importance, if it's a densely developed area with a block pattern, that the posted speeds shouldn't be higher than 35 miles an hour in those areas. And so this is just an example that a local government, you know, those are example descriptions, an example of standards that would be consistent with those of Florida DOT and how they could be applied at the local government level. We did, in the model regulations as they're written, defer to Florida DOT standards on the state highway system in the event that there would be any inconsistencies. We would want to avoid that. And so here is another example, and this one's based on posted speed. So you wouldn't have to assign access categories, but the speed would determine what the spacings are. And that's a simple method, actually. And speed is kind of a proxy for level of urbanization. Those speeds, our posted speeds are lower in the more urbanized settings. So that's another example that we're seeing used. But,
hey, Christine?
Yes.
This is Gary. I want to know how many people out there are familiar with Florida DOT's Complete Streets policy. If they would answer that. And this will remind me to put a copy of our policy in the summary email that goes out. Okay. We're still collecting responses. And
I'm going to go back to
okay, I'm going down to % of the people who have answered. I'm going to close and I'm going to share the poll. Most of you do know that back in 2015, the Florida Department of Transportation made a commitment to design its roads in such a way to be more consistent with the context at which that road was going through, that we would not under most circumstances try to design something for 45 miles an hour when it's going through a small downtown, for instance. And early on, Christine showed the context zones that were developed as part of the Complete Streets policy. And the reason I'm mentioning this, first of all, is that we did get a question from Albert. How do you define what measurable criteria, difference between urban and rural environments, and applying two sets of standards? And the answer is not easily. A matter of fact, the problem has been that in the past, not just Florida DOT, but most state DOTs only had designs and design speeds for what they called urban and rural. But what they called urban was really suburban. And so we were a lot of times trying to fit that round peg in the square hole when we had major highways go through downtowns or small towns. And so we have some districts that are actually going through on the state highway system and trying to define which context zone there is for every mile of state highway in in the system in their district, and others are going to be trying to determine the context zone as roadway improvements happen. And that would be when they would look at the definitions of what is those context zones. When they define that, then they would design the roads in different ways than they would. So where you have a lot of pedestrian crossings, it wouldn't be the same as if it was connecting with a 4-lane rural a multi-lane connecting two small cities in the west of Florida wouldn't be done. So, Christine, I just wanted to explain that it's not a simple thing.
Yeah. Well,
and
and
if anything, if they could see just a picture of those context zones again, I think that might help. I mean, what we
can you
had.
see it? I have it on the
Oh,
screen
you
now.
do? Okay.
Oh,
Right.
okay. I moved back there.
Okay.
And just if I could add that, so what's happening at the local government level too, and the local governments will need to, if they want a compact urban or urban center type of environment, they need to also demonstrate that if it's not there now, that they're going to adopt a form-based code of regulations that are going to accomplish that land use pattern. But in addition, what we're seeing in terms of the state-of-the-art of thoroughfare planning is the local governments are doing the same type of thing for their system, and then they're identifying a range of different cross-section types and designs for those different roadways. And then also freight-related issues as well. So for the movement of freight in the freight activity areas. So there's a lot going on in this area of how do we integrate land use and transportation planning and design in terms of our network and future plans. And access management, I mean, ideally, when we start to get good planning and good network, then those issues that you saw are going to go away in a lot of areas, and it's going to be a different kind of a situation of network. What is the intersection spacing? How do we manage modal conflicts on the roadway more effectively in those areas? And then you'll continue to have these other issues in more suburban and fringe environments. But
Christine,
yes.
we have somebody who raised their hands, Jeffrey Gower.
Yes.
And
Oh,
Jeffrey.
there's the question pane. I see it now.
Yeah, Jeffrey, I'm trying to unmute you right now, and if you do you have a question you'd like to ask us verbally?
Yeah, I was looking through the Cutter manual, and two of the tables that you were looking at, the table, I think it was table 4 and table 5, are different in the manual as opposed to what you were referencing.
Yeah, and because of your good searching, Jeffrey,
it created a problem.
I took the handout out because I might have posted the wrong version. Christine, I am so sorry. I am so sorry. But we will get the right version to you in the summary of this presentation. I mean, yeah, everybody who signs up for these webinar series, even if they don't attend, will get a way to get a summary of what was said and done, and the for instance, you know, we will include the information on our complete streets policy, as well as a link to the correct version of the handbook that Christine and Joshua did. So I apologize.
Oh, these are little. These were the latest and greatest, and yeah, and it's partly my fault too because I updated it.
Well, no.
Mute me, by the way, please mute me.
Mute you.
Okay.
I'm in an open office, and somebody
All
might.
Right.
Okay.
You are muted, Jeffrey.
Okay, good. Well, I'm glad you noticed that. They weren't hugely different, right? Just
but the numbering of the tables might be different.
Oh.
That's the thing.
Oh, the little footnotes?
Whatever. I'm sorry.
Oh, okay. It's okay.
It's my fault.
It's okay.
Sometimes I try to be helpful, too helpful.
And I'll double check the one that you have and make sure.
Yeah.
So, okay. But other than that, I don't think there were many changes. It was very similar. So that's really, if there are no questions, concerns, I could add to you, to just add to this is that the city of Orlando is in the process of updating their thoroughfare plan. And that's what gave me the idea when I looked at what they had come up with in terms of their 3 categories, to just kind of collapse these into 3. And then, you know, try to relate those, of course, to the context classifications. So that'll be helpful to local governments as they're moving forward in the era of complete streets.
All right. I see no more questions or hands being raised. And I just want to remind people that within the summary that we send out, you will get everything you need to know. We send out an attendee list that is verified, so you professional engineers can get 1.5 hours credit for this class, and we will send you the AICP members, how they can, the link for them to get credit also. And so that will be in our summary email to you, which, you know, shouldn't take more than a week. All right. So Gina?
All right, well, Christine, thank you so much for great work you've done creating the document and also for your presentation today. Thank you for your time and effort. And I also would like to thank everyone for joining, and I'm looking forward to having you guys back at our next webinar. So for our next webinar, we'll send you a notification and the subject of our next webinar. So we're looking forward to have you guys back. And with that said, and I don't see any more questions, and we will send you the right document, hopefully.
I'm sorry.
After we conclude this webinar.
Okay.
Well, thank you again, and goodbye until next time.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.